Hello, and thank you for watching D&D Book Club here on YouTube, hosted by myself, Megan J. What you're about to hear is a deep dive into the novel Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, which I first recorded in 2020 as a podcast episode. As of March 2022, I've recorded 19 novel deep dives total, and I've learned quite a bit over the past 2 years. But what you're about to hear is my earliest effort. You can expect the format to evolve and hopefully the overall quality to improve as I become more experienced. If you're interested in listening to my other podcast projects or watching my live stream game on Twitch, just follow the links in the show notes. There will also be a link to my Patreon page if you want to hear bonus episodes, and a link to my page on the DMs Guild if you're interested in checking out my original D&D supplements. Now, please enjoy the show. Imagine if you witnessed a genuine miracle with your own eyes. Could you still make sense of the world with the line between the possible and the impossible forever blurred? What would that do to you? How would that change you? And would you ever be the same again? The Blue Crystal Staff. The Seeker lurched across the floor to the barbarian woman, who was staring at him in disgust. He reached clumsily for her staff. "No," the woman called Goldmoon spoke coolly. "That is mine. You cannot take it." "Witch," the Seeker sneered. "I am the High Theocrat. I take what I want." He started to make another grab for the staff. The woman's tall companion rose to his feet. "The chieftain's daughter says you will not take it," he said harshly. He shoved the Seeker backward. The tall man's push was not rough, but it knocked the drunken Theocrat completely off balance. His arms flailing wildly, he tried to catch himself. He lurched forward, too far, tripped over his official robes, and fell headfirst into the roaring fire. There was a whoosh and a flare of light, and then a sickening smell of burning flesh. The Theocrat's scream tore through the stunned silence as the crazed man leaped to his feet and started whirling around in a frenzy. He had become a living torch. Tanis and the others sat, unable to move, paralyzed with the shock of the incident. Only Tasselhoff had wits enough to run forward, anxious to try and help the man. But the Theocrat was screaming and waving his arms, fanning the flames that were consuming his clothes and his body. There seemed no way that the little Kender could help him. "Here!" The old man grabbed the barbarian's feather-decorated staff and handed it to the Kender. "Knock him down! Then we can smother the fire." Tasselhoff took the staff. He swung it, using all his strength, and hit the Theocrat squarely in the chest. The man fell to the ground. There was a gasp from the crowd. Tasselhoff himself stood, open-mouthed, the staff clutched in his hand, staring down at the amazing sight at his feet. The flames had died instantly. The man's robes were whole, undamaged. His skin was pink and healthy. He sat up, a look of fear and awe on his face. He stared down at his hands and at his robes. There was not a mark on his skin. There was not the smallest cinder smoking on his robes. Tasselhoff's eyes went to the staff in his hands. It was made of blue crystal, and it was glowing with a bright blue light. Welcome to D&D Book Club. My name is Megan, and thank you for joining me for my first full episode. Today, we will be doing a deep dive into the novel Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, the first novel in the Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy, published in 1984 for TSR Incorporated. Before we get started, I want to warn you that this episode will contain spoilers. So if you haven't already read this 40-year-old novel and you don't want anything ruined, I suggest you read it first, then come back. Our next episode will be about the second book in the Chronicles trilogy, Dragons of Winter Night. So if you're reading along as you're listening, be sure to grab a copy before the next episode if you don't want spoilers. Both novels are still in print and can be purchased in any brick and mortar or online bookseller. First things first, I want to elaborate upon some of the mythology of the Dragonlance setting that will help to contextualize the novel. I won't be explaining the entire history of the world, just enough to help you gain your bearings in time and space. The Dragonlance novels take place on a planet called Krynn, almost exclusively on a continent called Ansalon, in a world at a level of technological advancement we might recognize as the High Middle Ages in Europe. Ansalon, unlike the settings in most fantasy novels you've probably read, is actually located in the southern hemisphere. The polar regions are to the south and the subtropical regions are to the north. There is a second known continent called Taladas, but we'll save that for later episodes. For now, the action takes place exclusively on, and that nearly all the characters are only aware of, the continent of Ansalon. Krynn is basically no different than Earth as a functioning planet. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. A day is 24 hours long, a week is 7 days, a year is 12 months, and they have the normal seasons we do. The most striking celestial difference is that Krynn has 3 moons to our measly 1. The largest is the silver moon, Solinari, the middle is the red moon, Lunitari, and the smallest is the black moon, Nuitari. When all 3 moons align, they create a great eye in the night sky. Each moon is the domain of a different god of magic. Solinari for white or good magic, Lunitari for red or neutral magic, and Nuitari for black or evil magic. All of the magic users of Krynn draw their power from one of these 3 moons. As the story begins, Ansalon is experiencing a time called the Age of Despair, much like our world in 2020. Roughly 200 years before, a disaster called the Cataclysm destroyed the great unified civilization that once existed, physically altering the continent as well as scattering all the peoples into small warring kingdoms. Famine and disease devastated the populations. The ancient true gods who were worshipped before the cataclysm had either disappeared or been abandoned by their worshippers. Much knowledge has been lost, but, even more importantly, hope has been lost. For most people, life is a struggle to survive in a harsh and dangerous world. Dragons of Autumn Twilight opens at the Inn of the Last Home in a town called Solace in a region called Abyssinia. The inn, like the rest of the town, was built high in the branches of enormous trees called Valenwoods as a refuge against marauders during the most dangerous years following the cataclysm. Solace is perhaps the single most important location in the Dragonlance setting, since most of our principal characters hail from the town, and it will be an important pivot point for all the novels going forward. Even within the narrative, Solace is an important stop along the travel route to Haven, the nominal governing city of the region. In the prologue, we are introduced to a character named Tika Whalen, a red-headed barmaid who will, eventually, go on to become a member of the band of adventurers we shall henceforth refer to as the Companions. She has an encounter with a mysterious old man who seems to be planning a party and provides an ominous warning of doom. It's not something you want to hear from someone planning a party, but let's just remember this old man because he'll be back. The following day, a group of longtime friends meet at the Inn of the Last Home after a separation of 5 years. We have Flint Fireforge, a crotchety old hill dwarf who's eager to return home after an unpleasant 5 years of traveling. We have Tanis Half-Elven, a wise and serious, you guessed it, half-elf, who we'll soon realize is the leader of these companions. And we have a Kender named Tasselhoff Burfoot, also called Tass by his friends. Kender are a halfling-sized race that have a tendency to steal anything that catches their eye, regardless of value, usually without intending to. This proclivity is called quote-unquote borrowing. The group is attacked by a group of goblins under the authority of a hobgoblin named Fewmaster Toda, who is searching for a blue crystal staff. The heroes quickly dispatch the goblins and move along. Here, I'd like to take a moment to digress slightly from my prepared remarks to say that, even as a kid, I never liked the idea of evil races, like goblins and ogres. Sure, technically they were created by the evil gods, but that doesn't mean they can't change their ways. After all, if there can be dark elves and dark dwarves, why can't there be light goblins and light ogres? We'll come back to this personal gripe later. When we reach the inn itself, we are introduced to a few more characters in rapid succession. We meet the twin brothers, Caramon and Raistlin Magier, who aren't entirely dissimilar from the twins played by Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito in the movie Twins. Caramon is tall, strong, handsome, charming, muscular, and a skilled fighter and probably one of the sexiest men on Ansalon, although seemingly of below average intelligence. His twin, Raistlin, is skinny, sickly, a certifiable genius, and suffers from a persistent cough as well as antisocial personality disorder. He has also undergone a drastic cosmetic transformation in the last 5 years, which leaves the others stunned. Then we meet Sturm Brightblade, a descendant of a noble family which belongs to the once proud order of mustachioed warriors called the Knights of Solamnia, although the Brightblade family was driven into exile and reduced to poverty. The last two characters we meet are two barbarians belonging to a tribe called the Quayshu, which seem to be modeled on the Lakota Sioux, perhaps just a generic interpretation of a Native American tribe. The first is Goldmoon, the daughter of the chieftain, and her lover/bodyguard, Riverwind. They have fled their tribe after Riverwind was sentenced to death for blasphemy for refusing to worship the ancestors of the chieftain. At least that was the official charge. Really, the chieftain just didn't want his daughter marrying a poor shepherd. Goldmoon carries a seemingly ordinary staff, which she guards jealously. Spoiler alert, it's not just an ordinary staff. Missing from the scene is the swordswoman Kitiara Uthmatar, the older half-sister of Caramon and Raistlin and Tanis' former lover. Although the friends agreed to meet back here on this day 5 years after parting, Kitiara is a no-show. She sends a letter apologizing and explaining that she's too busy adulting to hang out. Tanis is deeply disappointed. The happy reunion is interrupted when Hedrick, a local official with the ominous title of Theocrat, accuses Goldmoon of blasphemy for speaking of the ancient true gods. Hedrick belongs to an order of wannabe clerics called the Seekers, based in the city of Haven. The Seekers are a group who have taken it upon themselves to invent new gods to replace the old ones. No one can demonstrably prove that these new gods actually exist in any meaningful way, but that's never stopped people from forming religions. The situation gets completely out of hand, no pun intended, when Riverwind accidentally on purpose pushes Hedrick into the fire, burning his hand to a crisp, and Goldmoon heals him, using the gasp blue crystal staff she's been secretly carrying. Out of nowhere, the same old man from the prologue accuses the companions themselves of being accomplices to Goldmoon and Riverwind's attack on the Theocrat, and the group escapes from the inn and from Solace itself by crossing Crystalmere Lake in a quote-unquote borrowed boat and taking refuge in a hidden cave on the other side. It is during the crossing of the lake that Raistlin looks into the night sky and sees that the two constellations called the Valiant Warrior and the Queen of Darkness are missing. He calls this a dire portent of things to come, while the others don't seem too concerned about a bunch of missing stars. Personally, if the Big Dipper suddenly disappeared, I think I would do more than just shrug about it. Now we learn a little bit more about this mysterious blue crystal staff. Apparently, Riverwind found it in a place he can barely remember, which he refers to as the city where death had black wings. The staff has the power to instantly cure minor injuries like Tanis' rope burns, but not Raistlin's chronic illness. What makes this an earth-shattering revelation and not simply a useful novelty is that it is the first proof of the existence of the true gods that has been seen on Krynn for centuries. Realizing its importance but not sure what else to do with it, the companions decide to take it to the High Seekers, i.e. Hedrick's bosses, to see if they know anything about it. They don't, but it's irrelevant because the companions will never actually make it to Haven. Along the road, the group is ambushed by a group of lizard-human hybrids later dubbed Draconians, who are likewise seeking the blue crystal staff. The companions are able to defeat them and escape the coming reinforcements, but not before the Knight Sturm suffers a severe head wound, which the staff can only partially heal. Sturm begins to have concussion-fueled hallucinations of a white stag, and the group follows Sturm following the stag into a haunted forest called Darken Wood, which is convenient since it's the one place the pursuing Draconians will not go. Raistlin gives one of his trademark dire warnings and then tells the group not to harm any living thing in Darken Wood, even plants. That night, the companions encounter spectral minions, the ghosts of warriors who were sworn to protect the people but fled into the forest after the cataclysm struck and have been cursed to guard the forest as undead spirits. Raceland is able to magically commune with the spirits, who then call up some centaurs to carry the companions to meet a wise old unicorn called the Forest Master. The Forest Master feeds the companions, provides some exposition, then lends them Pegasi to fly them to their next destination, where the greatest gift ever given to mankind waits for them. For those keeping track, we have now had centaurs, a unicorn, and Pegasi all in the same chapter. For some reason, the Pegasi don't take the companions all the way to their destination, but instead drop them off within sight of the village of Quayshu, Goldmoon and Riverwind's home. The peaceful village has been attacked and most of the people massacred by soldiers seeking the Blue Crystal Staff under the command of Lord Verminard. Whether he chose that name for himself or it's a family name that sounds coincidentally like the name of a villainous overlord is unclear. The next day, the companions proceed along their quest to find the mysterious greatest gift when they are once again attacked by draconians, these ones magic users, who imprison everyone except Flint and Tasselhoff at their encampment, which is also home to an enormous yet surprisingly listless black dragon. This would be a good time to explain another piece of important backstory. In the world of Dragonlance, dragons haven't been seen for many centuries. Most people assume the dragons are extinct if they ever existed at all. Seeing a real live dragon would be quite a shock even to an experienced adventurer. Fortunately, this isn't a real live dragon. It's essentially a giant dragon puppet made out of wicker, created by the smarter draconians to keep the stupider draconians in line. Flint and Tasselhoff hijack the fake dragon and use it to set the camp on fire while the rest of the group escapes and proceeds towards their final destination. That final destination is Zaxaroth, a once beautiful city destroyed during the Cataclysm, which also happens to be the nightmare city where Riverwind found the Blue Crystal Staff. The companions are attacked by a black dragon, a real black dragon this time, named Onyx to humans and Casanth to other dragons. The dragon nearly kills Riverwind by vomiting acid on him, yuck and ouch, but he is saved when Goldmoon recharges the staff's batteries at the temple of the ancient goddess of healing, Mishakal. The companions descend into the ruins of the city, where Raceland befriends a gully dwarf named Bupu. Bupu is less stupid than the average gully dwarf, and leads the companions to her king, High Bulb Fudge the First, the Great, and then on to the lair of the Black Dragon. Goldmoon is able to use the power of the Blue Crystal Staff to kill the dragon, but seemingly dies in the process. The companions retrieve a bundle of golden discs and a night blue spellbook from the dragon's hoard before escaping. After fleeing the crumbling ruins, the group find Goldmoon alive and well, but now transformed into a cleric of Mishakal, the first cleric the world has seen since the Cataclysm. The golden discs, called the Discs of Mishakal, contain knowledge of the ancient true gods, aka the greatest gift ever given to mankind. Can you imagine if a missionary came to your door and asked, "Would you like to receive the greatest gift ever given to mankind?" Would you listen or just say, "No thanks, not interested," and shut the door as fast as possible? As for the spellbook, it once belonged to an immensely powerful and immensely evil black-robed wizard named Fistandantilus, with whom Raceland is oddly fascinated. Remember that cumbersome name because it's going to be important later. The companions return to Solace to find it sacked by Verminard and his red dragon, Ember to humans, but Pyros to his friends. The inn still stands, only not where it used to. Now it's on the ground. The companions, their friend the barmaid Tika, Theros Ironfell, the now one-armed blacksmith, and a mysterious elf are all arrested by our old friend Viewmaster Toda and imprisoned to be transported along to the slave mines at a fortress called Pax Tharkis. Along the way, they pick up a senile old wizard named Fizban, who has a remarkable resemblance to the old man from the inn, although none of the companions seem to realize it. Fortunately for our heroes, the mysterious elf happens to be Gilthanas, a prince of the Qualinesti elves and Tanis' childhood friend. Tanis and Gilthanas aren't exactly happy to see one another, though. They had a nasty falling out when Tanis dated Gilthanas' sister, Larana. The slave caravan is attacked by the Qualinesti elves, and the prisoners rescued and taken to the hidden elf kingdom. The elves of Qualinesti know that they are the next target for the Dragon High Lord's wrath, so a plan is devised. The companions, along with Gilthanas, will travel to the fortress Pax Tharkus to free the slaves, which should distract the dragon High Lord Verminard long enough for the Qualinesti elves to evacuate the city. Whether this might get all the slaves killed doesn't much worry the elves, who don't really care about a bunch of humans being massacred. By the way, elves are considered one of the good races. It is here in the city of Qualinos that we also meet Laurana, princess of the Qualinesti, Gilthanas' sister, and Tanis' childhood sweetheart. She's still crushing hard, but Tanis tells her he's in love with a human woman named Kitiara, breaking Laurana's heart. Laurana is beautiful, but chaste elf maiden doesn't exactly scream sex appeal, and the human half of Tanis is like a horny teenager where Kitiara is concerned. Speaking of sex appeal, it's about this time that Caramon and Tika realize they are falling in love with one another, although Caramon maintains his first duty is to his brother, and friend-zones Tika for now. On the way to the secret passage into Pax Tharkus, the group meets a human warrior named Aben Shatterstone, who is an all-around nice guy who will surely never betray them. Once inside the secret passage, the companions must defeat a giant slug monster and escape from a banshee. They also discover that Laurana has been following them since Qualinesti, determined to win back Tanis' love by acting like a crazy stalker and nearly getting all of his friends killed. Fizban and Tasselhoff are separated from the rest of the group during the confrontation with the Banshee. In another part of the fortress, Tasselhoff finds a painting depicting evil dragons fighting good dragons written by knights carrying, you guessed it, Dragonlances. Fizban, however, casts a spell that causes Tasselhoff to forget what he's seen. Why he does this is unclear, so you'll have to keep listening to the podcast if you want that mystery solved. The companions find the slaves, among them a silent man with a green gemstone embedded in his chest, whom the dragon Pyros plans to deliver to the Queen of Darkness. The ploy to free the slaves is almost instantly ruined when Aben, surprise surprise, betrays the group to the Draconians. The slaves have no choice but to attempt the escape anyway. They are nearly all incinerated by the red dragon Pyros before another red dragon, Flamestrike, aka Mataflor, suffering from some kind of PTSD flashback, attacks and kills him. Without his dragon, Lord Verminard is forced to fight on foot, where he is confronted by Tanis, Sturm, Caramon, and Raceland, although he easily kicks their asses using his evil cleric powers. His dark powers are no match for Goldmoon's holy powers, however, and she is able to defeat him and all the slaves escape except for the mysterious green gemstone man, who is apparently killed along with Aben the traitor. Fizban too is killed in the attempt to escape the fortress when his featherfall spell misfires and creates only a giant storm of chicken feathers. The novel ends on a happy note as Riverwind and Goldmoon are officially married. But, as the familiar saying goes, winter is approaching. Raceland provides his third or fourth warning of the novel, I lost count, telling Tanis that he sees no hope for the future without weapons to fight the dragons, some sort of long, heavy spear, perhaps. Tasselhoff overhears this and is deeply saddened, a rare state for a Kenner to be in, until he finds a white chicken feather, which, to him, means there may be hope yet. Okay, so that's my synopsis of Dragons of Autumn Twilight. As you probably noticed, it's very heavy on plot. What I would like to do is tell you a few of the things I liked about this novel and a few of the things I didn't. Keep in mind that this is coming from the perspective of adult Megan. Teenage Megan was a much less critical reader. The best thing about Dragons of Autumn Twilight, one of the best things about Dragonlance in general, I think, is the characters. Each novel and the relatively large ensemble cast of the novel has a unique personality and voice, as well as clear motivations, flaws, prejudices, and idiosyncrasies. I think the device the authors use of having the group of characters reunite after years apart is quite clever because the characters all know one another already, with the exceptions of Goldmoon and Riverwind, and have an established rapport, but they've been apart long enough that there is still much to be explored as they reconnect. It's especially true of Tika, Caramon, Raceland, and Sturm, who are all very young when they separated and have since grown into adulthood. While all the characters are skilled in their respective areas, whether that's fighting or magic or healing, the characters never come across as superhuman, or super elven, or super dwarven. They get hurt, they get tired, they get lost, they quarrel, they second guess themselves, they mistrust each other, and they keep secrets even from their closest friends. All this helps to make the characters feel like real people with genuine relationships. Caramon both loves and fears Raceland, who is dependent on Caramon and resents him for it. Goldmoon and Riverwind are deeply in love, yet she outranks him within the hierarchy of their people, and he has to obey her even when she puts herself in danger. Flint is very much a father figure to Tanis, who had no father of his own, and Flint's advanced age often leaves Tanis worrying about his health, and with good reason. Riverwind doesn't trust Tanis because he is a racist who doesn't trust those of elven blood, and Sturm doesn't trust Raceland because he suspects Raceland of being deceptive and manipulative, rightfully so. Another great strength of the novel is pacing. We are introduced to all of our major characters with the exception of Laurana and Gulthanis in the first 2 chapters, and once the group is forced to flee the inn pursued by mercenaries and goblins, the action never really lets up except for an occasional rest. Even during these periods, we get scenes of important character development, so the story never drags or feels dull. My favorite sequence in the novel is the journey down into Zaxxaroth. We get a lot of action, but it's well balanced with the humor of the Gully Dwarf characters and the genuinely touching friendship that forms between the dark and brooding Raceland and the helpful Gully Dwarf Bupu. The sequence ends with an exciting escape as the companions flee Zaxxaroth as the city collapses around them. The novel's major flaw is, I think, the fact that much of it feels like reading a transcript of a group of Dungeons & Dragons players having a session. In fact, that's the origin of the story of the novel and its characters. It was inspired by a real-life playthrough of the Dragons of Despair module and the Dragons of Flame module published by TSR for the Dragonlance setting. This one novel is divided into 2 parts, which clearly indicate where one module ends and the other begins. After escaping Zaxxaroth and after Goldmoon becomes a true cleric, everything about the Blue Crystal Staff becomes irrelevant as we move on to a new goal, attempting to rescue the slaves from the fortress of Pax Tharkis. One story ends and a second begins, all within the same novel. Unfortunately for Goldmoon and Riverwind, this leaves them very little to do during the rest of the novel, and even less in the later books. The transition between stories isn't as ham-fisted as I'm describing it, but it's not hard to discern if you're aware of the novel's origins. This origin is most glaring during the Sla Mori, or secret passage sequence, as the companions are attempting to sneak into the fortress Pax Tharkis. The companions travel from one room to another, fighting monsters, avoiding traps, looking for hidden doors, and finding treasure and magical weapons. It is, almost literally, a dungeon crawl without the dungeon. The novel is largely self-contained, which isn't a bad thing of itself. The book ends with foreshadowing to an upcoming war between the forces of good and the forces of evil, but it's not quite a cliffhanger. All of the plot threads have been tied up nicely except for the fate of the Green Gemstone Man, but his importance is only suggested anyway. The heroes are victorious, the villain is defeated, the slaves are freed, and there's no real urgency to do anything except celebrate the wedding of Goldmoon and Riverwind. But the novel also feels as if it was written without certainty that there ever would be a second book. Fantasy trilogies are ubiquitous now, so it seems a given, but it wasn't in 1984. Certain concepts are introduced which are never fully elaborated upon, perhaps because they didn't fit into the story which developed once Dragons of Winter Night was greenlit. But it achieved its purpose. If another book had never been written, Autumn Twilight still would have felt like a satisfying story. Now that we've discussed the book as a whole, I'd like to do a few character breakdowns to really get into the backstories, personalities, and motivations of the main protagonists of the story. As I said before, Dragonlance has wonderfully complex characters, more so than most fantasy novels I've read, certainly more than most fantasy novels inspired by Dungeons & Dragons settings. We'll start with perhaps the most important character in the entire Dragonlance series, the wizard Raceland Magier. Raceland is the twin brother of Caramon, born moments after his larger, healthier twin, and the two grew up in the village of Solace. Their family was poor, their father was a woodcutter, and their mother was prone to fits of insanity, which were actually a product of her own latent magical ability never being developed. As a child, Raceland is unable to participate in normal games with the other children due to his health. He is ostracized and bullied for his intelligence and is given the mean, if apt, nickname the Sly One by the other children. Raceland is protected by his brother and by his older sister, Kitiara, who essentially raises the boys. But Raceland's physical weakness, his brother's easy likability, and his siblings' perceived pity for him drive Raceland further inward. He channels his energy into the study of magic, for which he has an almost preternatural aptitude. He also channels his energy into helping the sick and the poor, a character trait which will stay with Raceland for the duration of the series. He's an expert on illnesses and their treatments, approaching their study with a methodical rigor we might recognize as a scientific method. Raceland, despite his selfish nature, is unfailingly kind and compassionate towards the weak, the downtrodden, and the suffering. Prior to the events of Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Raceland and his brother travel to the Tower of High Sorcery in Wayreth Forest, the seat of wizardly authority on Ansalon, so Raceland can take the dreaded capital T test that will allow him to ascend to the next level of arcane mastery. During this mysterious test, Raceland is forever altered, physically and mentally. His hair is turned white, his skin and irises are turned gold. His health, never good, is permanently shattered so that not even Goldmoon can heal him. Worst of all, Raceland's pupils form the shape of hourglasses, and he is cursed to see everything aging and decaying before him. The true nature of Raceland's transformation and the details of what he endured in the tower become clearer as the novels proceed. The physical change is why the companions are so shocked by his appearance at the outset of the story. However, Raceland is successful in his pursuit of magical power and feels the exchange he made for that power was a fair one. He takes the red robes of neutrality, although it is often suggested he might have chosen the black instead. Raceland is, in my opinion, the character most associated with the Dragonlance series, and its most perennially beloved character, despite his abrasive personality and despite committing the occasional murder. I think it's because Raceland is a character who succeeds not by being born into a noble family or because he's the strongest or best looking or the most charming, but what really allows Raceland to become the most powerful wizard in Ansalon, spoiler alert, is that Raceland never ever gives up, overcoming challenges that most people would never even attempt. Also, it's impossible for many readers not to see a little of themselves in Raceland. Those of us who ourselves had been mocked, harassed, abused, and excluded know how angry and bitter it can make one if one is not careful. There, but for the grace of the gods, go we. Next, I'd like to talk about the second most important character in the Dragonlance series, at least in my own estimation, feel free to disagree, the leader of the companions, Tanis Half-Elven. Tanis, also known by his elven name Tantalus, was born in the elven land of Qualinesti to an elven mother who was raped by a human warrior. Tanis is considered illegitimate, but his mother happened to be the wife of the brother of the king of the Qualinesti elves, called the Speaker of the Suns. Footnote, a later novel called The Inheritance will retcon Tanis' parents' story, portraying them as star-crossed lovers instead of sexual predator and victim. I don't know which backstory is more problematic, so I'll stick with what Tanis himself believes to be true. Anyway, Tanis isn't quite related to the royal family, but he's close enough kin that the speaker takes him into his household to be raised alongside his own children, the crown prince Porthios, the middle child Gilthanas, and the youngest and only daughter, Laurana. During his time in Qualinesti, Tanis befriends a traveling dwarven metalsmith named Flint Fireforge. When it is revealed that Tanis and Laurana have been conducting a secret, albeit innocent, romance, he's driven out of the kingdom and travels the countryside with Flint, ultimately settling down in Solace. It is in Solace that Tanis forms the friendships that will define his life. In addition to the wandering kender Tasselhoff Barefoot, Tanis meets Caramon and Raceland Magier and Sturm Brightblade and becomes kind of an older brother and mentor to them. Most importantly, he meets a female mercenary named Kitiara. She's the same age as Tanis if you calculate half-elf years into human years, and the two begin a passionate love affair. Kitiara's wildness and her zest for life, danger, and adventure appeal to the human side of Tanis' nature, although his love for Kitiara blinds him to the fact that she can also be cold, mercurial, and downright cruel. When the companions meet after their separation, Kitiara is the only one who does not arrive to the reunion, deeply disappointing Tanis, who is apparently never warned about the dangers of hooking up with your ex, and has carried a torch for her all these years. Tanis' greatest strength, other than his ability to mope and feel bad for himself, is his natural capacity for leadership. Although he is not the strongest, smartest, or highest born of the companions, they all defer to him because of his quick thinking, wisdom, and judgment. Yet Tanis perceives their trust as undeserved at best and a burden at worst. Tanis has a special connection to Raistlin because it is with Raistlin that Tanis feels he can be the most honest about his inner demons, knowing Raistlin would understand and trusting Raistlin to keep it a secret from the others, who are depending on Tanis to be steadfast and confident. The two characters are never exactly friends, but Tanis is certainly more respected by Raistlin than are any of the other companions, who Raistlin repeatedly calls fools. Lastly, I want to give some attention to the character Goldmoon, who I feel is a criminally undervalued character. Goldmoon's official title is Chieftain's Daughter, which means, as you might suspect, that she is the daughter of the chieftain of her village and people, the Quayshu. The only child, she becomes the effective leader of her tribe when her father falls ill with stroke-like symptoms. Her tribe, the Quayshu, are called barbarians, but only because they live in a more primitive conditions than most people. Their society is no less civilized. They are not the seeming Norse or Celtic inspired barbarians you might typically imagine when you imagine a barbarian in a Dungeons and Dragons setting, but seem more Native American inspired, specifically those who inhabit the Great Plains. The Quayshu engage in a kind of ancestor worship, with the ancestors of the chieftain, as well as Goldmoon's late mother, being seen as divine. As happens in literature, Goldmoon falls in love with a man below her station, a humble and handsome shepherd named Riverwind. Riverwind's family lives on the margins of Quayshu society because they never lost faith in the ancient true gods after the cataclysm, seemingly the only family on all of Krynn not to have done so. The chieftain won't let the two marry unless Riverwind proves himself worthy. He sends Riverwind on an impossible quest to find proof of the existence of these ancient gods. The quest apparently takes 5 years, although in the novel the village of Quayshu and the city of Zaxaroth are only 2 days apart. He returns with proof of the ancient gods in the form of the blue crystal staff, which can heal miraculously, but the chieftain declares Riverwind a heretic and a charlatan anyway. He is about to be stoned to death when Goldmoon joins him, preferring to die rather than live without him. Fortunately, they have the magic staff, which teleports them to the outskirts of Solace, where they encounter Sturm Brightblade on his way to meet his old pals at the inn. Goldmoon is described as being beautiful, regal, intelligent, and an accomplished diplomat and leader, as well as singer and lyre player. It is her captivating song about her love for Riverwind and Riverwind's discovery of the true gods that prompts the outburst from Hedrick the Theocrat, which then kicks the whole plot into gear. She is also afraid of heights, as we discover in Zaxaroth, a nice human touch in a fantasy character. When the group is deep in the ruins of that ancient city, Goldmoon sacrifices her life to destroy the dragon Chrysanth and save her friends. Fortunately, she still has a magic staff, and it teleports her to safety in the Temple of Mishakal. Apparently, Goldmoon has gone through some kind of crash course in ministry and is now a cleric of the goddess. She is now able to heal with her prayers alone and leaves the blue crystal staff behind. Goldmoon believes that her new mission is to bring the Discs of Mishakal, which contain all the knowledge of the ancient gods, basically the Dragonlance version of the Book of Mormon, to a man who can read their language and then found a new church. That person is found in the slave mines of Pax Tharkus, in the form of the noble if misguided High Seeker Elistan, whom Goldmoon heals of a deadly illness. Personally, I feel this is a major misstep by the authors. Why introduce a new character, especially one as bland as Elistan, to form a church and spread knowledge of the true gods when you've already got a strong, capable leader in Goldmoon ready to go? It's not as if Goldmoon plays a significant role in the story after this novel anyway. Following the Chronicles trilogy, Goldmoon will basically become a wife and mother who teaches Sunday school until a much later novel when she finally gets her moment to shine once again. Before we finish today's episode, I want to take a few minutes to explore the culture of the Dragonlance series, specifically 3 races which appear in the Dragonlance setting, but not in a typical Dungeons & Dragons world. They are unique to the world of Krynn. First, the Gully Dwarves. We encounter them in the ruins of Zaxaroth, where they were once living quite happily until being enslaved by the Draconians. Why Draconians would want such stupid and useless slaves is beyond me. Gully dwarves are basically a subrace of dwarf, smaller, more cowardly, and less intelligent. They typically can't count past two, but who have the ability to thrive in even the most squalid conditions. Essentially, Gully dwarfs function as comic relief, but Bupu is a quite likable and sympathetic character in her own right. The authors made the wise decision of keeping her in the story for only a few chapters, however. Gully dwarfs are best appreciated in small amounts. Then there's the Draconians. Prior to the events of the novel, Draconians are unheard of on Krynn. They are a new race which appeared fully formed, seemingly out of nowhere. In fact, the origins of the Draconian race are somewhat of an ongoing mystery in the Chronicles trilogy, not explained until the final novel. I won't spoil it here. When the companions first encounter Draconians on the road to Haven, they are completely taken off guard and nearly killed, which would have made for an unsatisfying novel. Initially called lizard men, the Draconians are humanoid in shape and size, but with reptilian faces, claws, tails, and wings. They come in 5 different types: Bozak, Baz, Kapak, Sivak, and Orak. Don't worry if you don't remember the 5 types, it won't be on the test. The types vary in size and intelligence, with the more intelligent ones ranking higher in the Draconian hierarchy, specifically the Orak and Bazak, which are the only types able to use magic. The Sivak are unique for being the only Draconians capable of using their wings for sustained flight. Each type reacts differently to being killed as well. Instead of just laying down and being dead like you'd expect a defeated enemy to do, the Draconians are sore losers and will explode, turn to stone, turn to acid, or metamorphose into the shape of their killer, depending on their type. Draconians are violent, evil, and cruel. They serve the same function in the Dragonlance setting that the orcs serve in The Lord of the Rings, the foot soldiers of the armies of evil. Side note, there are no orcs on Krynn. In later novels, we are introduced to a Draconian named Kang, who is an army officer simply trying to save his race from extinction. You might say he is the exception to the evil race concept, or at least he is a member of an evil race with a tendency towards self-reflection. We'll finish out today with the Kender, a race of beings that Dragonlance readers and players either love or hate. Kender are about the same size as halflings, which, like orcs, do not exist in the Dragonlance setting, but in appearance are essentially small elves with childlike faces. Their society, such as it is centered around their own small country called Kendermore. However, all Kender are stricken with wanderlust as they reach adulthood and become unable to resist the urge to explore and see the world. As such, Kender can be found anywhere on Ansalon. Some Kender eventually return to Kendamore to marry and raise a family, but this is by no means universal. As we discussed earlier, the racial kleptomania is typically called quote-unquote borrowing. Kender are considered a good race, and as such they don't deliberately steal out of greed, but instead they are helplessly attracted to pretty or interesting objects and will simply take them without conscious intent. This is probably the reason people, both within and outside the narrative, hate Kender. No one wants to adventure with a party member who's going to constantly steal your stuff, no matter how useful his or her other skills, such as sneaking, lockpicking, and taunting, might be. The most interesting or perhaps challenging trait of Kender, at least from the perspective of a writer and the perspective of a role player, is that Kender are immune to fear. Not fear-based magic, just normal everyday, oh my god, a dragon is chasing me fear. They will cheerfully stroll into the most dangerous situation with no regard for their own life and sometimes without regard for the lives of their fellow party members either. Unfortunately, a character who cannot be motivated by fear is pretty static. Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman deal with this problem fairly deftly in their portrayal of Tasselhoff, however. As Tasselhoff matures during his adventures, he learns to feel fear for those he loves, even if he's still biologically incapable of feeling fear for himself. It strikes an effective balance and allows Tass to become one of the series' most enduring characters. That is all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions or comments, I can be reached at dndbookclub@gmail.com. That's DAND bookclub@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at DandDBookClub. Don't forget to check back in 2 weeks where I will be discussing the second novel of the Chronicles trilogy, Dragons of Winter Night. I hope you'll join me, and until then, feel free to help yourself to some spiced potatoes.